Thank you everyone for joining the webinar. My name is Christine Ma, and I'm a member of ArcGIS Smart Cities team. I will be the host and facilitator for today's webinar. And our topic today is Scenario Planning Reimagined with the City of Boulder. I'm joined by Kalani, urban designer for the planning department of Boulder. Today's webinar is essentially a conversation with Kalani to discuss how Boulder is conducting scenario planning using a set of new tools. But before that, I want to quickly set the stage and provide some context as to why scenario planning is so important today. As planners, we are all challenged by uncertainty. For example, with extreme climate events becoming the new norm, we are forced to reevaluate how we are planning for the future. Political shifts and economic events also cause us to rethink how we develop. What if Amazon moves in? How can the city deal with added high-income population while still maintaining affordability for all? And what if the next generation's preferred mode of transportation is something that we would have never imagined 5 years ago? Our cities are changing rapidly, driven by factors such as climate, economics, and technology. But our normal 5, 10, 20-year plan updates and static documents are not always capable of capturing and responding to the changes, particularly not when they're based on a single projection of the future. In addition to that, it's hard for planners to communicate the trade-offs related to complex issues and to help communities see their options and choose a path forward. And that's a key reason why we developed ArcGIS Urban, a web-based 3D planning system that provides a framework for planners to create, analyze, and share scenarios more efficiently. Urban can first give us a clear and data-driven picture of the current condition, as well as factors to produce scenarios. We can then quantify the impact of each scenario, reprocessing and reiterating on a controlled set of parameters, thereby surfacing the link between parameters and impacts. And because Urban is a web-based app, you can integrate collaboration and participation into the scenario planning process. And the key here is being able to refresh this process at any point when your factors change, which helps cities move toward a dynamic and adaptive planning process. So with that, let's shift gears here. I'm pleased to officially welcome Kalani, an urban designer from Boulder, who is going to share with us how Boulder approaches their projects through scenario planning. Thank you, Kalani, for joining me today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good morning, Christine and everyone. Thanks for having me. My background is in architecture and urban planning, and I joined the city in 2015 from private consulting to help support the city's design excellence initiative. So I support the planning department at the city, their comprehensive and current planning divisions directly, and then consult with other departments like transportation, housing, and parks.
Nice. So for this interview, you'll see we have Boulder's ArcGIS Urban app here in the background, and we will be navigating through it while we are having this chat. So for those of us here on the call who are not familiar with Boulder, Kalani, can you kick things off by telling us a little bit about your city?
Sure. So Boulder's located along the eastern foothills of the Rocky Mountains, and the city covers about 27 square miles. We have a population of about 107,000 people, and we're located about 30 miles northeast of Denver. We have 3 regional centers in town, including the historic downtown, as you can see on the map here. And we're also a university town, and we're home to the University of Colorado, and there are about 33,000 students in the town. And the city's a regional employment center for a growing tech industry. We have Google office here, some federal labs, Ball Aerospace. So we have about 104,000 jobs in the town, and approximately 60% of those jobs in commute from around the area. And we're expecting the population to grow in the city from up to about 123,000 by 2040.
We know it's no accident that Boulder is one of the most desirable cities in the US. It has a long history in planning and has made some very smart decisions through the years. What are some key innovations and themes in how Boulder is planned?
So we have a little more than a century of formalized city planning, including our first city plan in 1910 by Olmsted. And then beginning in the 1870s, the city began to purchase land surrounding the city to preserve as natural areas and open space, and it's become our growth boundary. So you can see on the map here the growth range. We also have a comprehensive plan, 6 adopted area plans, 1 sub-community plan, and we started a new sub-community planning program. And there's other plans like the Transportation Master Plan or Open Space Plan. And all of these initiatives help address the city's priorities and shape the built environment.
So it does sound like a lot is going on right now. Kalani, what would you say are some of the top planning related issues facing the city?
So with our growth boundary, we have a limited amount of land available for development within the city. And so most of the potential for development is infill development at this point. And we've also prioritized environmental sustainability and resiliency. So our flood and carbon footprint, but the city lies within a watershed. So there's several creeks and rivers that run through it. And we carry a fairly significant flood risk. And we had a devastating flood in 2013. And then one of the other issues, like many other cities across the nation, is we have a housing shortage, especially for middle income and other types of affordable housing. Currently, we have about 46,000 housing units, and it's roughly split in the city between owner-occupied and rental units.
How is the city positioned to address this challenge?
So specifically to city planning, our comprehensive plans and other long-range plans address identified priorities like affordable housing or the environmental goals or land uses. We've made some strategic land acquisitions and are currently in the process of developing area plans. And as these are implemented, they should translate into some zoning code changes that improve the housing inventory and address other issues.
Right, yeah, I can see the housing vacancy rate is specifically low around the downtown. So are there
Yes.
any specific areas where the city is focused on providing more housing?
Yes, just north of the downtown here within a half a mile, one specific area we're looking at is the Alpine Balsam area and the redevelopment of some city-owned parcels to further meet these citywide objectives. And so you can see it there with the red dot. So in 2015, we purchased an 8.8 acre site. That's a decommissioning hospital site. And with the acknowledgement that it was going to probably catalyze some change in this area, it led to a vision plan. We're in the process of adopting an area plan currently, and we'll go through further implementation, some zoning changes that we need to explore these scenarios with. And a few of the identified priorities for the zoning scenarios is to provide more housing options, establish a city facilities service center there, and then to improve the environmental conditions of that area.
Gotcha. So we have some parameters we want to test in different zoning scenarios. So I know you've done scenario plannings in the past, and from what I understand, the process was pretty complex. Can we put it up here and take a look?
Of course. So we have run different scenario planning on different area plans and different small properties. And typically our process has kind of 2 phases. It's an internal analysis portion, and then we have the public facing visual communication, that visual content that we're trying to prepare for the community and decision makers. And the internal analysis usually starts with taking a look at the municipal code, the zoning districts, whatever plans that apply to that area. And then we'll take a look at some massing models. So we like to take that written word, all those words into a 3D format. And we'll usually use SketchUp at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And we start to investigate square footage, FAR, based on zoning there. We need to take the data from that because we have to hand generate that into Excel. So we'll hand generate the data that we're typically looking for, whether it's open space, lot coverage, dwelling units, projections. And depending on how many scenarios we're looking for a particular area, we end up, this is an iterative process. So we go back and forth in a loop through this portion. And eventually this all gets spit out to kind of a final product or several products on zoning types. And we need to do a little bit more refinement on the spatial end. And so we typically come back into SketchUp, add a few more details in there. And then as we prepare things for our final products, we need to then further polish the visual content. And that could be anything from the Adobe suite of tools, the Autodesk suite of tools, Lumion, etc. And we'll take that visual content, and that usually ends up being a 2D format, something like a PDF or JPEGs that are hosted on a website, or printed documents. So that's our process, and it's a staff, sometimes a staff and consultant type of project scope.
Mm-hmm. How long would it typically take to develop all the scenarios for one area plan?
For our larger projects, we've had projects that take 400 hours to 2 months of work.
Oh, so you've been using ArcGIS Urban for this outbound Barson plan. Can you walk us through how the scenario planning workflow changed since you adopt Urban?
So since adopting Urban, it's more like a 3-step process. So we're able to review the existing zoning in 3D in Urban, so within the zoning districts there, review and run the 3D massing and modify the parameters on zoning districts or buildings, and generate the data all in that one app. And then we're able to also produce the public-facing portion, the collaborate and share out with the community. So it's one platform across the board.
Nice. So let's get back to Boulder's Urban app here. Could you show us how you're doing scenario planning now in Urban?
So we open the plan, and after getting into the plan designer mode, so you can see from the plan information box there, we get into the plan designer here. And as that loads, you'll see some information pop up around this area. So the zoning districts are on, and the future boundary or the future building, so we'll turn those off. And the red line focuses on the area plan, and then the black line is the city-owned properties within that area plan. And it includes a 38 or 385,000 square foot hospital that we're planning to demolish, a medical office addition that we're going to renovate, and another medical office building and a parking structure in there. And so turning the zoning layer back on, I can see that the hospital site is a P zoning, and I can look in that zoning type and see some of the parameters, including the height limit, the number of floors maximum, and some of the allowed uses for that zoning district. And then you'll see around, I can check around the area, and I can see some single family residential. I've got some transitional business through there also in the pink. And all of these have information loaded in the zoning district as far as the allowed uses and the parameters. And this site is also located along one of our main arterial corridors. And it has a well-loved retail center. So it's one of our 15-minute neighborhoods.
Gotcha.
So the other thing we can check in here is I can turn on our flood zone to see how the flood may impact this property. So there's a high hazard conveyance zone because there's a creek that's been buried over in here. So part of the plan is to daylight this creek and mitigate for the flood through the area. So we need to plan for that in the land use and the development. And this area also has a significant amount of paving. So we have a heat island effect and we need to also try to mitigate for some of that.
Got you. So basically the first step is to understand the existing zones and site constraints, correct?
Exactly, but instead of referring to the Muni code that lives online or the, your land use code in your binder, we can look at the zoning parameters in a spatial context instead. And because the zoning is preloaded for the entire city, I can go to anywhere in the city and check what those parameters are and understand how that is, how that applies to in a 3D context.
Nice. All right, now that we understand the existing condition and the zones, and also the zones around your city-owned property, could you tell us which factors or parameters you want to test out in your scenarios?
So for this redevelopment and the zoning changes, we want to look at space use changes and zoning changes that are going to vary height and density. And so we're working through 3 scenarios based on the area plan. And those are scenario 1, a housing priority without a height modification. Scenario 2, housing priority with a height modification. And then a scenario 3, it's a city and county facility co-location at the site with some housing. And so for the first scenario, the housing priority without the height modification, I first start by subdividing the parcel here and propose new zones within the plan. But you can see here, we also created, you can propose new zones based on existing ones. And this one's the Alpine Balsam High Density Residential 2. I was able to remove the density limits on it, but maintain the existing height and add a space use of residential multifamily to this. And from here, I can look at the zoning envelopes for these assigned districts to see the potential of that. And then I can assign.
That takes account of the height, the setbacks that you put in. Okay.
Yeah, it takes account for those at the maximum envelope.
Gotcha.
And then from here, I can assign building types and look at what a redevelopment could look like with those zoning district rules and the building type rules applied. And so you can see the Alpine Balsam multifamily residential is in there. For this particular one, we created this one as a copy from the out of box, but we removed the ability to put below grade parking because of our flood constraints in the area and the high water table. So it's part of our, so some of the solutions we're working through on the environmental end of things. And it also, it allows us to, you can put your maximum floor numbers in there.
So for scenario 1, you propose apartments on townhomes to add more housing, but there's no change to maximum building height. How about for scenario 2?
So for scenario 2, it's much like scenario 1. I'm able to make a copy from scenario 1, so it streamlines there. And then I use that as the base for scenario 2. But what I'm doing now is adding a height overlay for specific parcels within that area to allow the maximum height to move from 35 feet for these particular buildings or parcels to 55 feet. So you can see here, you can just change the maximum height overlay, and you can make overlays for other things.
Mm.
And as we spin around, you can see that the building changes in at that point from three floors to 4 floors based on that height overlay.
Yeah, I remember we talked about adding overlays for flood zones and having a buffer around the flood zones for no building.
Yes.
All right, so how long did it take you to create scenario 2 from scenario 1 and increase the height?
It's incredibly quick. It's less than 5 minutes. So once you have your base scenario built, and if you have to do the platting of it, and that's defined, adding the other scenarios, pardon me, is much quicker than trying to alter and recreate SketchUp models or for each version and recalculate all those inputs.
Gotcha. Well, that's quite a change from our previous workflow. Now, what do we have in store for scenario 3?
So for scenario 3, we're looking at co-locating county offices on the site with our city facilities, along with adding some housing. So I've created a new government building type here and assigned it to that parcel. And I'm also able to customize it with no below grade parking. And part of this is because we have an existing parking structure in a parking district. One of the things the county needed was they have some fairly strict or constrained building requirements in their internal program, and they need to be able to have a building that's 120 feet wide, and they have a minimum square footage of about 120,000 square feet. So I'm able to verify with the tools from Urban here, measuring tools, and you can see I'm measuring the pavilion building because we're going to rehab this building and add another floor, and I need to make sure that this building is under 55 feet. And so you can see from the measurement, it's about 53 feet there. But the tool's fairly seamless to use because it has these laser markings that helps you reference whether you're on an x-axis or a y-axis, which isn't always the case when you're trying to measure in 3D if other people have tried to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's great that you can use the built-in measuring tool to validate this scenario. So now that we have the 3 scenarios established, how do we evaluate the impact and compare them?
So each scenario has a dashboard associated with it, and it shows us the data on the population growth, or say the dwelling units that we've added or jobs created. It's all the information we'd normally get from the number crunching in Excel on uses and hypothetical build outs. So I was able to, so as you can see here, some of the numbers, and so I'm able to see the space uses, the percentages based on the scenario, residential, single family, and I was able to, we needed to create a single family attached for this particular scenario, and I can adjust the area per household, and this square footage roughly matches some of the projections and data we have for the earlier work. And this makes the dashboard estimates more accurate in the projected dwelling units and households for this type, and it gives us, you can also do this modification on all of the uses, but you can see that from scenario 1 to scenario 2, our dwelling units, we had an increase of 29 units, and we were able to meet our projected target of 220 units through there.
Nice. And I know understanding parking requirements and trip generation is also important for this plan. Can you show us how you're evaluating the parking demand of each scenario?
So the property, like I mentioned, included a parking structure. And so we presumed we would be looking at a parking district and a transportation demand management and a fairly constrained amount of parking that would utilize 410 spaces or so. So we used the dashboard results generated from Urban with the added housing units and other space uses like office, combined that with our own transportation modeling factors, to understand the impact on trip generation or parking requirements for these 3 different scenarios. So you can see here, based on advanced mobility strategy, scenario 1 and 2 can utilize the garage. The demand does not exceed the supply. But when we get into the county scenario and with the square footage at 180,000 square feet, that demand starts to exceed the supply available. So now I know I need to go back and we need to look at a new scenario, scenario 4, and start to modify either the zoning constraints, those parameters, or the building use parameters to start to shrink the available space the county can develop on. And see if our parking supply, the parking supply starts to drop within the thresholds that we've identified.
So you can extend the dashboard to additional indicators that matter for this plan. Now, as we know, public engagement is central to scenario planning. How do you plan to use Urban to engage the community and get their feedback?
So since it has a public-facing portion to Urban, we're able to toggle in here. We can click on different plans in the area. We can toggle between scenarios. We can share with the public some of the data that's associated with each scenario here in the changes. So they can see some of the visual impacts and some of the, say, housing and how we meet different goals with each of these scenarios. And we're also able to share the URL or embed the app in our websites. So we can put it on other pages. And then we can also embed our own plan, links into this. So if they want more information, they can also go to that. And we can use survey 1, 2, 3 links in here to ask people about different factors on the scenarios. And it's great because a small percentage of our population interact through these high-touch engagement events. And so for the folks that can't attend the board meetings at night or the workshops, they can directly engage and get the same information and quality of information in one place. And then Urban also has a kind of an open comments ideas feature. So you can click on that, and it's allows people to draw on particular plans geolocated to certain projects, and they can leave comments and suggestions and their responses in here. So for example, that one's about an intersection. And so people can like them, kind of like Facebook, there's emojis and icons and that type of thing. But this is helpful because decision makers can also look at all those comments, and we can collect those, and we get a better sense of, it's a more custom way to understand what people would like to see in places.
Nice. And finally, I want to ask about your project review process. Can you show us what you've been testing in Urban for project review in 3D?
Sure. So currently we have a 2D development review map, and it has links to different 2D, what we call exhibits for projects. But ultimately what we'd like to do is replace our 2D map with a 3D map. We're able to load all of the projects into Urban and then set their status, whether it's under review, approved, under construction, and we can track them by these status buttons and have a holistic view of what's going on the private development side across the city. And so for projects, we already have some 3D models, and we're in the process of uploading those. But for our purposes in running Urban for Development Review, we're taking a look at this example project here at 1500 Pearl Street. We can see the existing model there. It's a parking structure above grade with a retail wrap. The proposal is to add a solar array across the top of the parking deck. But this project is within the downtown, so there's some fairly strict design guidelines. And so this gives us a chance to view this project at different angles, understand some of the view impacts or aesthetic impacts to this, also model some of the shading and solar analysis, across the seasons, from the shortest day of the year to the longest day of the year. And we feel like it's going to be very helpful to get a good understanding of what's going on as far as development across the city.
Right. So last question here, I promise. What do you plan to do next with Urban?
So we have, like I mentioned before, a sub-community plan program that's started this year, and it's hopefully do all of the sub-communities through the city, so that will probably use Urban. We also have a few smaller area plans coming up that will use Urban in. We have a strong desire and request from community and decision makers to improve our visual communication. And so we'd like to start to use Urban and integrate with City Engine on our plans, and then move to some VR experience for people in the community and decision makers to use as part of their consideration on some of these proposals.
All right, thank you, Kalani, for walking us through your scenario planning and design review workflows in Urban. You and Boulder Planning are really doing amazing work here. And all of us on the Urban team are excited to provide a tool that helps you work more efficiently and effectively. And personally, Kalani, it's been really fun working with you. I'm so happy we were able to do this together, and I look forward to spending more time working on other projects in the future.
Thanks, Christine, and the Esri team for inviting me to do this. It has been a lot of fun, and I want to thank the audience for tuning in and their interest in what we're doing here.
All right. So for everyone on the webinar, if we can just take a minute to answer our poll question here. Tommy, can we bring up the question? All right, the question is, are you currently conducting scenario planning in your organization? Yes, we have established work process. Yes, but we don't have a repeatable workflow. No, but we'd like to. No, we don't have a need for scenario planning. See the results, it's up now. You can see it's looks like we have a good mix here. But majority 59% is no, but we would like to. So the one thing we seem to agree on here is that we all need scenario planning. So just to summarize, Urban was released this July, but over the last year, we've been refining and improving Urban together with a group of over 30 early adopter cities, counties, and regions, Boulder being one of them. And our early adopters have shared with us several key values that they see in Urban. First, Urban provides the ability to visualize projects citywide, both internally, but also in a shared public view. Urban can improve planning productivity by visualizing and analyzing zoning in 3D, which can be used to drive detailed scenario planning down to the parcel level. Urban can increase transparency and understanding by communicating current status and future trends. It can also drive better engagement. Cities can incorporate BIM and other types of 3D models into the project review process and present the proposals live to City Council and the public. So how can you get started using ArcGIS Urban in your planning projects? So Urban is a release product. You can get information about licensing by contacting your Esri representatives, or you can directly reach out to the Urban team through the email on the screen, smartplanning@esri.com. And if you have a project that you'd like to use Urban for now, you might want to consider the ArcGIS Urban Launch Kit, which is focused on providing you with an IOC, initial operating capability for a specific project that you identify. Esri Urban team will build the app using your data so you can begin using it right away. And we will also provide training to make sure you can further expand and maintain your Urban app over time. So please let us know if you're interested in Urban or the Launch Kit, and we look forward to helping you get started. And before we go, I would like to point you to a few resources where you can learn more about ArcGIS Urban. We'll also send these links in a follow-up email. And thank you all for joining today's webinar. And a big thank you again to Kalani from Boulder Planning. I really appreciate your time today. I'm so grateful that you were able to join us and share your story. All right, have a great day, everyone. Until next time.